Hi, I'm Greg Corombos. My guest at this time is Stacy Washington. She is known as Stacy on the Right. She's an acclaimed radio host with a program of that title. She's co-chair of the Project 21 National Advisory Board, and she's an Emmy-nominated TV personality and Air Force veteran. Stacy is here to join us to talk about the George Floyd death at the hands of Minneapolis police, as well as the protests, which in many cases have turned into rioting in American cities. And Stacy, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, I'm so glad that we get to have this conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. And a lot of times when we have these police-involved shootings, there's a great deal of controversy about the facts in the case, whether it's the situation in Ferguson or several others that we've discussed over the years. And this one, there seemed to be almost no debate. It was a death that absolutely did not need to happen. I really didn't see anyone arguing in defense of the officer in this case. Yet somehow we've gotten to this point where the demonstrations, which have turned into property destruction, have kind of taken away from the focus on that case. What happened here?
Well, so Greg, I was the same way. I was looking around online social media, really combing the internet to see if there was anybody out there who was defending the death or the officers. So anybody who was against what I felt like was just a national public outcry. And usually if you go into the depths of Twitter, you don't have to scroll very long before you find people giving a horrible opinion. And I still couldn't find anybody. So it was almost universal, Facebook everywhere, and all of the biggest voices especially. And there's often, even on the most simple issue, you'll find a range of opinions when you look at the biggest voices in politics. This was universal, the left and the right, moderates, apolitical people, Christians, Muslims, you name it, Jewish people, everybody's out there saying the same thing, that these 4 police officers should be brought to justice, and that the death was not only unneeded, but was horrifying to watch. You literally watch a man die. And it was so gut-wrenching. And I feel like a lot of Americans just were going to bed heartbroken. And there was a lot of tears surrounding it because it just felt like any person you might know, you watch them die and it was for real, not like a movie. So from there, when the protests erupted, I assumed that Antifa would get involved, but I didn't expect to see hundreds of cities across the country experience property damage or the level of, there's open violence against police officers that I've never seen in my life before. It reminds me of when the 5 officers were shot by the sniper in Dallas. And it was just like a pivotal moment where everyone paused for a moment, and Black Lives Matter came out with a statement and said, this cannot be, this isn't what we're about. And especially the Christian groups that were organizing and marching also denounced the shooting of the police officers. But this is different. No one on the left is really denouncing the hurting of police officers. They're getting stoned, they're getting hit in the head with water bottles, they're being drug out of vehicles and beaten. And also the violence against innocent people, like little old grandmothers getting beaten up, people trying to defend their businesses getting beaten up, and the vandalization of like the biggest names on the left, like Nike. They're hardly Trump supporters. Their buildings are being vandalized. Target, they've always supported far left policies. Their buildings are being burned to the ground. So there seems to be an unrequited desire for blood and mayhem, and it is being meted out in the streets of America in a way that I think is really unprecedented. And for the president to respond with, military force, I think it's just the last thing that any person in America really wants to see. Those of us who are rational and are not participating in this, we don't want to see military vehicles and actual active duty military personnel quelling rioting in America, but that's where we are.
Stacy, one of the explanations I've heard on this is that this isn't just about George Floyd. This has to stop. This whole problem has to stop. And so it's bigger than just the Floyd case. He's just the most obvious example that rallied everyone to the cause. What do you make of the argument that one of the reasons that it's happening is because it's a bigger issue than just this case?
Well, okay, so that sounds interesting, but it's almost as if, Greg, you're saying, hey, Stacy, you've made some major progress on an issue that you've been advocating for. And in the moment where you get pretty much everyone on your side, everyone's agreeing with you that there's something wrong, then you go out and shoot everyone who's agreeing with you. So I would be harming the cause that I purport to support. And that's what's happening here. The people who say that they want Americans to stop shopping and working and, doing everything that we do, and take a moment to mourn the death of someone who was killed by rogue police officers and condemn those officers and call for justice. And the moment when all of America does that, on the heels of the quarantine, which has devastated the economy, and there's an uptick in suicides, a huge amount of just mayhem and carnage in the personal lives of millions, tens of millions of Americans. And in that moment where Americans are finally quiet enough to actually watch the video and everyone's seen it, and then everyone has the same reaction, the people who claim to want the ears and hearts of Americans on this issue are now doing exactly the thing that will turn everyone away from supporting any kind of a movement to reform, use of force policies in police departments, or, the rooting out of corruption and bad officers in police departments. Any of that can't happen without widespread support in America. And that support is being obliterated by the violence. And I mean, people are dying in the streets of America right now. They're getting shot, they're getting beaten to death, they're getting killed in ways we don't even understand. A Black woman was found dead in her car. No one's sure exactly what happened to her. That investigation is ongoing. And there's just hundreds of stories like that. 50 shootings in Chicago last weekend. That's a record even for Chicago. So I don't think, I hear the justification, but it is falling on deaf ears. It's not it doesn't match up with what we're seeing. What we're seeing is the kind of rioting that you would expect if Americans kind of just yawned and said, yeah, so what, George Floyd died. But no one said that. Everyone is horrified and shocked and wants justice. So it doesn't make sense what's happening right now.
What are you hearing from your listeners, and I guess particularly African-American listeners? Are they fit to be tied because this unified spirit was squandered in many ways with the arrival of Antifa and others? Do they feel like if there weren't massive protests that this would have been forgotten in a number of days? How are they reacting to all this?
Well, so the messages that I've gotten so far have really been, people are disgusted that there's so much proof out there, video proof, that Antifa is doing the property damage, but leaving tags behind with spray paint that says Black Lives Matter. So I've even watched videos that have been forwarded to me that show Black people are standing there peacefully protesting, and Antifa members dressed all in black with the black face mask are coming in with spray cans and spray painting BLM and hateful comments and things on buildings. And when they're confronted, they say, we're doing this for you. And the people there are saying, we are the Black protesters. Don't do this in our name. Don't do this for us, because they're going to come to our community and look for us for, basically tagging these buildings and breaking these windows and everything. But we're not the ones throwing the bricks. And so my message to everyone, I've been doing some media on this, and I just want people to understand that when you see bad actors step into a peaceful protest and turn it into a riot, your only response is, if you don't have the numbers to stop them, to leave. And so for Blacks in America today, the best thing you can do is to honor the memory of George Floyd by praying at home, by writing your congressman or your senator at home. But really, it's not a federal issue. It's the issue with your local police department, your city leader, your municipal leader. Write those people, email them, call their office and request meetings. Do the civic duties that you can from your home, because right now this movement has been hijacked by bad actors, Antifa specifically. Whoever's delivering the bricks, they're now pointing to some George Soros organization that's actually connected to Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. More investigation needs to be had before we can definitively say if they're the ones who are delivering pallets of bricks around the country. But it's been hijacked. So the best thing to do is to go home. Don't be a part of something that is criminal because you want to protest. The First Amendment has been really bastardized by Antifa and taken control. And the only way to take control back is to not participate. So people have to go home. And I'm saying that as a First Amendment proponent. I believe in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And I absolutely think our rights are being infringed upon, but it's not the government that's doing it. It's Antifa and bad actors in the community. And they're being bussed in and paid to do this. So you can't fight that one-on-one. You have to go home and allow them to be dealt with by the authorities. The president has just activated some kind of lawful or unlawful insurrection act. So they're going to begin to really round up these criminals. They're looking for, the FBI has actually requested information on video, anything, any footage that you can provide that proves who these people are. That's what has to be done. And I feel bad for them. I've seen videos of people crying while they watch their community torn up, and all they wanted to do was just have a peaceful march. And so, what else can you do but to go home and to make sure that you're not a part of the mayhem?
A couple of minutes left in our conversation with Stacy Washington, co-chair of the Project 21 National Advisory Board, radio talk show host. StacyOnTheRight.com is where you can find that. Stacy, a couple of questions, as I said. First of all, what's your take on how the mainstream media has approached this? I'm especially thinking of Ali Velshi with a giant fire behind him in Minneapolis, saying that overall the crowd has not been unruly. And then maybe it's actually over the weekend where Don Lemon compared it to the Boston Tea Party as a bunch of cities were engulfed in flames. So what's your reaction to how the mainstream media has dealt with this?
Well, I mean, let's start with that last one. That's a doozy. Greg, during the Boston Tea Party, I remember reading about this as a child, and I've refreshed myself as an adult. I don't remember any of the people who participated in dumping the tea, which was the item that was being taxed, which people felt was illegal by the British government, or the Crown anyway. No one then went back into their neighborhoods and set fire to the businesses or neighborhoods that they lived in. It was the tea that was dumped, and that was it. So they dumped the product to make a statement about not participating in the tax. There was no property damage. Now, if I'm wrong about that, I'll take my lumps and I'll come on and correct myself, Greg. I'm known for, I will correct or apologize if needed. So what I want to say about any of the media coverage that we've seen is it's all driven by hatred of President Trump. They want to get rid of him. And no matter which way you're voting, the thing that we should be most concerned with, really, honestly, instead of November, can we just think about tonight? Do we want to see our cities on fire like a third world country tonight? No, we don't. So we want to support law enforcement, bringing people who are damaging property to justice. And we want to continue to have a conversation nationally about reforming corrupt police departments and rooting out corruption in police departments and honoring good public servants, which the majority of our police are good public servants, and getting back to some sense of normalcy. And that's all we can do.
Dive into that just a little bit more, because we've talked a lot about what's not gone right over the last week since the Floyd death. But what will it look like, I don't know, a few months from now, a couple of years from now, if we actually look for concrete solutions here? What needs to be pursued specifically and aggressively?
Well, I would first say that here in Ferguson, one of the best things I've seen happen, it was spearheaded by an organization called M1 Bank. It's called Mission One Bank, and the couple that runs it, they're philanthropists, and they've taken a special interest in Ferguson and have joined together with business leaders, and they've spearheaded a reinvestment effort that has brought Ferguson back from the brink. And that is a private investment. That's not the government or anything like that. They were able to bring Ferguson back and make it a vibrant town again after the violent riots that erupted here, because they took an interest. And this couple doesn't live in Ferguson. They live nowhere near there. And they really hadn't had too much interaction with Ferguson outside of doing some events there beforehand. So this is what has to happen across the country. Around America, private enterprise will have to go into communities that have been damaged by the rioting and take an interest in the people there so that we don't see widespread blight across the country where damage has occurred. Because contrary to popular belief, insurance doesn't cover riot acts. It's in every policy. Acts of God and civil unrest are not covered by insurance policies. So every business that's been burned down will have to be brought back with private investment funds. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there's a way to approach reforming police departments and rooting out corruption. I go back to what people actually believe. If you're voting for a party that has given you nothing but failure and corruption, then you need to vote different people in. I'm not talking about party here. I'm talking about ideas and culture. So you want to change the ideas that you're supporting and voting in. And then culturally, what coincides with us having riots across the country? An unprecedented edict that has come from local leaders across the country saying we can't be in church. I know some people don't want to hear me say this, but I'm here at your request and you asked me, so I'm going to tell you, it's no coincidence that we are not in church right now. We're literally prohibited from attending church, which studies show lengthens life. People who attend church have a better sex life. People who attend church have less disease and they have longer lifespans, and they're calmer and they're better able to handle major life issues. We need to open the churches back up and let people go back into their houses of worship and connect with God so that we can have the calm that we need to deal with what is really, it's like the year of revelation. Every time we think we've gotten over something, I mean, the murder hornet showed up after COVID-19 and now we have the riots. People are at their wits' end. They need to be able to go to church. So I have like a million ideas I think would help, but we have our blueprint for a better deal for Black America. And it was published in 2018 and we actually updated it for this year. And we just, at Project 21, we're nonpartisan. Obviously, a lot of us are right-leaning, but the main idea here is what you just said. What can we do so that things are better tomorrow, next month, next year? Well, there are some things we could do, but for the first thing that has to happen is we can't have our cities on fire and people losing their livelihoods and their homes and their schools. They're vandalizing churches and schools. That's how you know this isn't about George Floyd. So I hope people will hear some of what I've said and just, if you take a nugget from it and we could do something together, regardless of our political background, it would really help us all in dealing with all of this.
Well, hopefully folks can get back to the point of all this in the first place. Stacy, thanks very much for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Stacy Washington is co-chair of the Project 21 National Advisory Board. She's an Emmy-nominated TV personality, Air Force veteran, and she's host of the Stacy on the Right syndicated radio program. I'm Greg Corombos reporting for Radio America.